So I guess a couple of questions come to mind, and I just want to sort of prime the pump. And of course, we're going to open up for questions from you guys. But I think one of the initial questions might be about something that was mentioned in the keynote, and it has to do with all the zillions of frameworks that are out there. So it's maybe a little bit more of a front-end question. And that has to do with, like, what is the state of web components and frameworks, and which framework should I be using is always the standard question. And I've heard some of the standard answers before, which is, I think somebody here said the one that works for you. And opinions. Anybody want to start on that? And then I have one other follow-up before I go to the audience.
I can start. In my opinion, it all depends on the skill level in your team. That's one. And second, if you can hire people who you want to hire. The thing is that here in New York, in many big enterprises, program managers don't even have a say to who you will be working in the team. They get an outsourcing partner and they get a team. If that's the case, Angular, 100%. Safe bet. If Joe Smith leaves your project, then you need to find someone else as a replacement. Mary Lou comes in, and as long as she knows Angular, she can join your project easily. If you decide to go with React, in the same setup, and Joe Smith, let's say he's a senior guy, leaves the project, Mary Lou may need to get familiar with a set of a la carte frameworks and libraries that Joe decided to pick, and it's not that easy.
I actually say that all the time. That's exactly what I say, so it's kind of funny.
And you use Joe Smith as well and Mary Lou?
I think that was a good answer. A lot of developers today are also learning React because it's really popular. And I have an engineer that I work with, and my background is we've been using Google Polymer, and Google Polymer is not the most popular library out there, but React is. And so the one engineer that I work with, he always argues with me. He's like, well, the developer experience, and if I want to go get a job somewhere else, like, it's better to know one of the popular libraries or frameworks, because then it's easy to go from your job to somewhere else. And that's perfectly true. That's like full stop there. Yes, learn something popular because it's easy to get a job somewhere else. The corollary to that is, for me, I'm a vanilla JavaScript developer. I understand how the web platform works. I understand how all the frameworks work. I look at all the different ones and I'm like, oh yeah, that makes sense. And I know what's happening under the hood because I've been in the ecosystem for such a long time. And eventually you want to reach that point where you get started with Angular or React, and even switch around, because then you learn more programming skills, but understand what's happening behind the framework. And then you'll be good regardless of what happens.
Yeah, I want to follow up with that. And when I used to do recruiting, we'd bring people, this is back before React and all that. So basically it was jQuery. But when we brought people in, I would say jQuery does not exist during this interview, right? I want to know that you know how to write plain vanilla JavaScript, and then I know that you'll be able to use jQuery once you work here. But I want to know that you know what goes on behind the scenes, under the covers, so that when you use jQuery or whatever framework it is, you're using it as a tool and not a crutch.
I think Simona has.
I'm just gonna follow up the follow-up. And I'd like to add that, in my opinion, recently I've seen a lot of synergy between frameworks. So you can see that they're almost learning from each other. I'm not sure if Rob mentioned this in the morning, but I bet he did. You can see how Angular has learned from Ember by building on top of Ember CLI, and then React has started using one-way data binding, and then Angular has started promoting, and now with Angular 2, or the latest version of Angular, we're using one-way data binding. So I think that it's important to choose based on your team skills, but as well keep an open mind to what all the frameworks are doing, because you can easily pick up patterns like state management. You can use patterns like the Redux pattern in whichever the framework you might be interested in. So keep an open mind, kind of.
Okay, so I'm going to move to another question that somebody on the panel actually prompted, which was, so you said vanilla JavaScript, but somebody else asked, what about TypeScript? You know, I don't think there was a lot of talk about TypeScript per se today. A lot of ES6, but not necessarily TypeScript. So perhaps opinions on TypeScript?
I'll go.
We are invited from Innovet, right?
I mean, there's also some people from Microsoft on the panel. That doesn't.
Yeah. So I have a computer science degree, and my first programming language was C++, and I've learned like compiling and everything, and I had to type int whatever, and I have not used statically typed languages for the last 15 years or so, like really long time. And because I like writing code and I like stuff happening quickly, and I don't want to have to type all this extra information out. And that was like everyone else was writing Java, because basically you're writing Java or you're writing web stuff, and the Java engineers would write so much code, and I'd be like, oh my goodness, I do not want to write Java because I would have to type so much. And now it's weird because you have all these JavaScript or Java developers coming in and wanting to write JavaScript, and they introduce TypeScript, and it's like, now we need static typing, and I'm like, oh no, I don't need it. I don't need it. But it's actually a good thing in some cases. But for me, I don't like it.
And remember, it's not really static because it's kind of duck/optional/.
Yeah, it's a process that has to run on your JavaScript to convert it to something that the browser actually interprets and runs. So it's another process.
That is true.
I don't like layers.
I like to add something, and just came to my mind. I never thought about TypeScript that requires a lot of typing, but you know, not the types, but the typing. But yeah, that sounds good.
So I like transpilers. I used to be anti-transpiler. I used to be like, why use Babel? Vanilla JavaScript everything, but transpilers are so nice, and they can be pretty painless, and they give you so much syntax freedom. I don't have to worry about my runtime. I can use Babel env and transpile back to certain targets. Like I can say I care about IE11, but for this other build I want just modern evergreen browsers, or I only care about Node 6, and so it'll automatically transpile back to a given target. Super nice. I don't have to think about it. TypeScript, so I'm kind of in his boat, which is JavaScript was my first language I learned, and I've been doing it ever since. So I'm used to that loose typed thing. But developing like that ESM loader, it's a significant amount of code, and there's lots of places for bugs to creep in. And I've noticed, like, if I don't have a unit test in one place, there's like 3 or 4 bugs hiding there. And I can see where TypeScript can be. I think of TypeScript as like a lint plus. It's so you have linting, and type checking is just part of that, right? It helps you write cleaner, more correct code, and catches bugs faster. So I dig that. But I haven't started using it at my own projects yet. So I think eventually, the thing that scares me away is the upfront like interface and definition creation. I run some popular JavaScript libraries, and I don't have to create type definition files for those. Other people do it for me. So I would say, like, if you can get someone to create those type definition files, that's great. You can use that. So yeah.
Was it CoffeeScript that won you over, right?
I want to comment. I really like TypeScript, and I think Christian said that he doesn't like typing. So there are people who don't like typing when they develop. They prefer typing when the runtime happens error, right? Then they would be typing a lot more to fix the error. So I belong to the first category. I'd rather type up front, and then I won't be typing. Right. Second, with TypeScript, you can write a lot less unit tests, right? No need to write them. Third thing, I've heard that, again, Christian said, I believe that he doesn't like transpilers, right? He prefers pure JavaScript, but there is no such a thing as plain JavaScript. What is JavaScript? ES5 or 6 or 7 or 8? If you will be using all of them, but you want them to run on all browsers, you're going to have to transpile it. JavaScript into JavaScript. So I really like TypeScript. It makes me more productive.
I always say that we don't program in JavaScript anymore. We program in Babel.
Well, and if you're using Webpack or something like that, you're running a transpiler over your stuff too. I mean, it transpiles import-export as well and does all that stuff too. So you can't really escape it, right? You're going to be bundling because, yes, modules are supported in browsers, but it's still not optimized as well as a single bundle. He's right about typing upfront costs for definitions, but then like for VS Code, you get integrated code completion and all those hints and all that stuff too. That's what powers VS Code's autocomplete, right? Is TypeScript definition files, and a lot of those are for libraries. Like I said, even for mine, as you're typing, it knows to pull it down automatically, and you get all that stuff for free. So all the things you like about VS Code there are in part because of TypeScript. So.
Okay, how about I open it up to a question from the audience? Does anybody have any questions for our panel? That's you just want to listen to them talk, huh? No? Anything? Okay. I'll run across with my extra mic. Here you go.
Just a couple more benefits of TypeScript. So you can get rid of with plain vanilla JavaScript, you have to defensively sometimes sanitize your inputs, and you can just get rid of a lot of runtime code by just saying this must be an integer. You can't call it without an integer, and so you don't have to do any checks is this not an integer? Okay, return false or whatever. So there's that, and then there was one other one. Oh, okay, forget TypeScript. I was going to ask. So what is if there was a talk that you didn't give today, but you're like, oh, what am I going to talk about next conference, or what do I think is the next thing that's going to be hot that we didn't talk about this conference, but maybe is going to be on the horizon for next year? Do you guys have any thoughts about that?
What was that? Go ahead.
I can tell you what I will be talking about next. The thing is that TypeScript, of course, but the thing is that I just started writing another book, and this one is on TypeScript. And when we submitted a proposal to the acquisition editor, that book was supposed to have an app. And we tried to get away with typical thing, I will write a client for REST API, one of the public API, and I will explain how this works. And he said that this is a boring app. So every book has either to-do list or make requests to Reddit or to GitHub or something like this. So we decided to write an app on blockchain. So in the book, I mean, in the beginning, we were a little bit scared, because the app's supposed to illustrate the language. It's a book about a TypeScript. It's not a book about the blockchain. But the more I started to look at it, the more I like it, so I definitely will be talking about it. And I think it has huge potential, that technology.
So if I didn't give the GraphQL talk, I'll be talking about machine learning. Machine learning using JavaScript, especially because, Google has intensified their efforts right now with TensorFlow, and then they also, released a new JavaScript library for you to be able to use TensorFlow and then machine learning within the browser. So that's what I'll be talking about.
I'm going to follow up on this, and I've seen in other conferences, surprisingly not today, many people focused on the web about VR, and probably thanks to using now WebGL, it's possible to do that in the browser. And also there are amazing frameworks, I've seen a framework called A-Frame. I'm not an expert, but basically that allows you to write something that is very similar to HTML or web components if you want, and allows you to basically define 3D scenes with animations and characters and interactions by just writing something that is as simple as HTML and some JavaScript. So that's probably something that will make building VR experiences much easier and much more accessible for many developers. You don't need to know C, you don't need to know low-level graphics, low-level 3D. So that's probably something we will see more and more in the next JavaScript conferences.
So for myself, I decide on the go. So last week I decided that next week I'm going to talk about state management and NGXS with Angular. And then I'm going to compare Apollo Client with Urkel. So that I just decided on the fly last week. So next year I have no clue. I mean, there's no way I will know what are we talking about in 1 year. I usually pick what's hot today. That's a little bit easier.
That's nice. So I kind of fall into topics, but I can tell you that some of the cool things that are coming are WASM combined with ESM syntax. You're going to see a lot more of that. Node is shifting from just being a server-side runtime to trying to allow you to write code that runs in the browser or Node. So you're going to see it start adopting a lot more standard APIs. So I'm sure you're going to see talks there. Node has just got experimental worker support, so you can spin up worker instances, which is pretty cool. So I can see like more of that, more of the browser Node line blurring, and more talks about how to take advantage of that and like write a single piece of code that works in both places.
And I'd like to encourage everyone here to apply to speak next year, because I don't want to talk anymore. You have plenty of ideas and plenty of things to talk about, so definitely submit proposals for next year. I think one of the big things that a lot of folks that I would know here would be interested in hearing about is like, oh, I just graduated from a boot camp. What do I do now? And there's going to be a lot more folks graduating from boot camps next year and the following year that they really need help and guidance as far as what do I do now? So somebody write that talk.
I'm going to follow up with that and just say that if anyone needs mentoring or if they want to bounce ideas with someone, feel free to reach out, I guess, to all of us, because I'm sure that most of us are willing and want to spend time on that.
And I can help with jokes. I can write jokes.
They won't be funny, but you can help with the jokes.
Next question.
Good transition.
I heard mostly today when giving examples about the currently popular frameworks, Angular and React kept coming up, but in other mediums I've been also hearing a lot about Vue.js. I wanted to know what's the panel opinion on Vue.js?
It just supports React. What was that? It just supports React in GitHub stars.
So it surpassed React in GitHub stars. So
wow.
Yeah. So at Comcast, we are actively researching and starting to use Vue.js over React. So,
Why?
Why? For me, there's like the JSX syntax stuff versus writing actual HTML code, and I know you can do. I think a lot of the frameworks are kind of coming together and taking ideas from each other, and they're all doing the same thing. Evan Yu has done a great job creating a very strong, vibrant community around Vue.js, and I think a lot of people like that. And sometimes you get scared of like corporate, like Facebook owns React and they can take it a certain way, versus a community of people own Vue.js and they can take it many different ways. And there's so many ideas pouring into Vue.js and comparable things to React that it really makes the community grow and thrive.
Or it's because it's popular and he can get a job somewhere else.
I think we spend a lot of time talking about what framework is the best, and probably we do the same with the color schema in your IDE and the font and the ligatures and all this.
Gerard Sun is the best font. Gerard Sun.
Exactly, and I think we should be talking about other things, because in capabilities, I mean, a lot of people ask me this again and again and again. And in my mind, there's no difference. They are working on top of the web platform. We are using the web platform. I mean, there's nothing that I can do in Angular that I cannot do in Vue or I cannot do in React. I mean, the differences are really minimal. And some people talk about performance. You look into performance and they are behaving exactly the same. Okay, so it's not performance. Then you look into popularity. Well, now we know that Vue is more popular in GitHub than in React, whatever that means. I mean, maybe there's some robot there that Evan you created a couple of months ago. I mean, nobody knows. But I think we shouldn't be talking about this. I mean, pick one and just, learn it, use it, to the best of your knowledge. But I don't think you will find, I mean, there are some scenarios where, for example, React Native is clearly superior than other options, but just because it's been around for longer. So a lot of the issues are being worked on.
There's a Vue native.
Oh no, of course. There's Vue native everywhere.
There's
but,
native script, let's not forget.
Yeah, native. You have native solutions, but React Native was released in 2014. So now it has like 4 years of maturity. That's a little bit superior. That's something that was created last week. But besides that, I would say that they are all great.
I would want to add that you cannot just ask this question in general. What is the best framework? First of all, who are you? No, look
Making it personal.
Look in the mirror. Why are you asking this question? Because you want to get a job? Then just go on online job search engine and do search how many openings are in your area where you live. That's one thing. Who are you again? Are you a development manager who is considering which framework to use in the next project? Then go to Stack Overflow and see how many questions are asked and answered. Go to GitHub, see how many contributors are there. I don't know if anybody remembers, like 2 years ago when Angular was not that popular yet, Angular 2, I mean. People started to say online, no, don't go Angular, it's an overkill, go to Aurelia framework, if anybody remembers it. What's going on with Aurelia now? Where that guy went to work to the company we are in right now. I don't want to name the names. And that's about it.
He also tweeted that he likes TypeScript now, so today.
So basically, it's a general question. I mean, just to ask questions for starting a framework or something, it's useless. Some people will say don't use any framework. And some people can actually write any web app that will deliver to-do list without framework. If you can believe me, I've seen a couple of those people. So, but always remember that a framework is just a tool, and you cannot fall in love with the tool. You cannot love Angular or you cannot love framework, like you cannot love a Phillips screwdriver, right? Phillips screwdriver is good for one thing and it's not good for others. And also you cannot love something that can't love you back. So it's not about I love framework. I don't like framework. I do Angular over the last 3 years. Do I love it? No. Will I cheat with some other framework next year? Most likely. So it's just a tool.
Can I say why Vue is the best framework? Okay. Well, first of all, the organizers of Vue and NYC meetup are right here, so say hi to them, right? Second, like my personal website rocks Vue like 1 RC, so like I love Vue from a very old age, and that's what Angular 2 should have been, right? But the other reason why Vue is excellent, if you use Vue CLI to bootstrap your project, it includes Cypress IO for your end-to-end testing, right? That's the only major framework that does that, and it was like a completely their work. We didn't do anything. They just added us because they loved end-to-end testing and their users. So Vue is excellent.
You can pass it to.
Oh, thank you. Hi. Yeah. If anybody wants to talk about or host or sponsor Vue, please talk to me. I have a follow-up question from the previous person. What is the best starter Pokemon?
It's a framework.
You should use the CLI.
Okay, so I don't have an answer, but I know who knows. If you know Nolan Lawson, who now works for Microsoft, right? He did this progressive web application with like all Pokemons. You should find his Empire.js talk on like web workers and service worker. It's excellent, and it answers which one. Okay.
Hi, I heard React Native mentioned, and I hope this isn't another hot or not question, but I was curious to find out what the panel's opinion is on like JavaScript in different platforms. So like for mobile applications, there's React Native. I guess there's also Vue Native as well. And then using JavaScript to write desktop applications like Electron. I've heard that there are performance issues. Do you think that JavaScript in these different platforms is sort of like a viable or something that can last or grow, or is it just going to kind of die off because it isn't a good solution?
I dig that JavaScript is used in like Electron and React Native and Vue Native and all that stuff. And with React Native and things like that, JavaScript is used, but the perf problem is the UI bit, right? You don't want to simulate the UI in the web view because that's gross and a nightmare and never matches native, right? You can't get the native performance, the native animations, all that stuff. So those solutions kind of sidestep that issue, and then it's just down to crunching data. I don't think the perf problem is really there in that area. So I wouldn't use JavaScript to simulate UI stuff, like creating a complex widget. And so I'm from Microsoft, and we had a thing called WinJS, and WinJS tried to simulate native controls, and it was a nightmare. Because we'd have to sync up with the UI, and this was internal devs to Microsoft, so they could actually get the algorithms and animations just right. But it was a lot of syncing, and it was a lot of overhead, and using the native bits there makes sense. But I don't think JavaScript's going anywhere. I think you'll keep finding creative solutions where they'll have native do heavy lifting, but then JavaScript to be able to write your application logic, just because JavaScript is so approachable. And it's the number one or like the most popular programming language. So you're going to see people trying to do it everywhere, right? I've seen them use it for like ways to instead of writing a SQL query, you could write JavaScript. You can now do it for interacting with native bits. So yeah, that's not going to go anywhere. The perf problem of JavaScript has never stopped its adoption. Right? They're always going to cache it and figure out ways around it.
Who made the corollary? If something can be written in JavaScript, it will be written in JavaScript. Yeah.
I want to add on to that a little bit, and what was said earlier is like, don't love your framework, also don't love your language, because there are cases where, and I love JavaScript. I write JavaScript. I love Ruby too. But there are cases where you need something that compiles down to bytecode because it's a lot faster and more performant. So, if you were writing a video game on your phone, you wouldn't probably do that in React Native. You would have to write Swift code or Kotlin or something that compiles down to machine code. But if you were just building a web app which displays data and allows input forms from your users, use React Native. You could use the web for that because JavaScript and forms are fast enough to load. So there's benefits, pros and cons for everything. And really it's, again, don't love what you currently know. Figure out the best use case for the users. Why are you smiling like that?
Is there any mics? You want to pass them up? Pass them forward.
I love JS too.
Just be scared when self-driving cars are running JavaScript, because...
Hi. So I was just wondering if we could go down the line and could you give us like what your favorite time-saving utility or app or like favorite thing that makes your life better in terms of development?
I think you should start from
I'm going to go with when the children go to bed.
For me, it's been linters. They save me so much time. I run it. I now compulsively run it. Before I do anything, even after I do just a little bit of code, I run a linter on it because it catches so many syntaxy things that I would slip on. So
You just need to switch off your phone. That's really good.
To me, for at least more complicated applications, like when you want to do full stack things, I really enjoyed in the last few years to do serverless stuff because it removes a lot of the concerns about, okay, what kind of server do I need? Or what kind of hard drive? Or how long do I need to run this thing until I have to scale to another server? So that's something that is helping me a lot as a developer to be more productive.
So I develop in React, but even if you didn't, and I said this before, codesandbox.io, it is, a lot of times I don't even bring up VS Code and install Node on my local computer and all that kind of stuff. It is in the cloud, it is there, it bundles, it interfaces with GitHub, it's phenomenal. You can publish from it, it's phenomenal.
That's the presentation I want to really make, like all the tools that I use that like I cannot live without. My favorite right now is renovateapp.com. It's a GitHub app that updates your dependencies and even auto-merges if all the tests pass. Like all my apps are up to date. I don't have to think about it.
I like tools like REPLs where you can quickly test something, especially when you work in the web. You need to have a place to put HTML, a place to put CSS. Maybe you need to download some libraries or frameworks. So I like, in particular, I like CodePen, codepen.io, I think. So you can easily, quickly sketch something. Also, for Angular and React developer, I think they support React. It's called Stack Blitz. It's an IDE, online IDE, no installation of anything. It's a Visual Studio Code online, technically. You go in there and you just work and try and develop really cool tools.
The lack of coming last. I wanted to mention serverless. That's what my talk was on as well. And then I've mentioned during my talk that the best thing that ever happened to serverless and VS Code is the Azure Functions extension, but that's like very specific to serverless. That has made me very productive. So if you're going to experiment serverless, I recommend you try that. And yeah, that's it.
So I think for me is Sublime Text. I mean, we've had several editors come up, but they've died along the way. And then now we have VS Code, and everybody's shouting VS Code, but I don't know where VS Code will be in 5 years' time, but I know Sublime will remain. Sublime is fast, it has all the packages, shortcuts are easy to learn, and it's just great.
I want to add one more, guys, so I'm sorry. I don't know how could I have forgotten about it. It's if any of you is involved in writing documentation, technical documentation, or books, the best thing is ASCII doc markup and ASCII doctor utility. I've written the last probably 3 or 4 books using it. I don't use Microsoft Word for many, many years. Excellent tool, excellent code generators. They will generate you text in PDF, in EPUB, in Mobi. So if you need to write technical documentation, I highly recommend you look at it. Look at this markup, and it won't be that annoying as it is if you will use something else. ASCII doc, ASCII doc. Read about the markup and then ASCII doctor, which is a utility to generate stuff.
And I'll just say that I'm still a user of WebStorm, and that's been around, or at least IntelliJ has been around for a really long time. So I'm sorry. Oh, here we go. That's not going anywhere.
So, not to start another hotness war, but so Svelte has recently been out, and they're taking the approach of we're just going to compile everything down to the DOM code that you need. And then on top of that, we've also got Kotlin that is now compiling down to JavaScript. So I guess, what are your thoughts about the future of, we're just going to write a completely different language and then compile it down to the JavaScript that you want?
It's awesome, and I dig it. And Svelte uses the ESM loader for its server-side rendering option, so shout out to them. Thanks. Yeah.
So I have a kind of a really high-level question about what does your process of continuous learning look like as an expert in the field? And also, do you have any tips for somebody that's interested in speaking? Conference level speaking.
Oh, we're speaking like a fake. Yeah. You can start with meetups, maybe.
Yeah, I think a lot of developers too also don't like to attend meetups. I don't know, like especially like the core developers. But then, how do you keep up with learning? For me, I'm very active on Twitter. And if you are a developer on Twitter, you discover that virtually like all the framework authors and library authors, John is on Twitter. So like all these guys are on Twitter, and if there's like a new feature or if there's something new happening, for example, if you follow the guys on the core React team, you discover they tweet a lot about, that's how I knew like Suspense was out before it came out, before people started writing about it, even when it's coming up in like 16.5, they're already talking about how they want to, talking about the placeholder feature and like the query delay and all of those cool stuffs. So that's how I keep up with like many of these stuffs. And then if there is a new tool, for example, when React came out, of course I didn't jump on React, but just looking at it from a distance, I check the documentation once in a while, see the kind of people that are implementing it, the kind of companies that are jumping on it. So when I see like some of the like serious, there's some companies or there are some products like you really respect. Once they start to jump on some of these things, you know that this stuff is getting serious, and then you gradually start to adopt it as a side project. The more side projects you have, the more you can experiment with many of these new tools before you decide to make it serious, like in your own startup or your own stuff. That's the way I keep up.
So I'll second the note on the Twitter note. Like, I used to follow dev blogs, and then devs stopped blogging, and they just shoot out tweets. So you have to follow them and kind of cut through the noise there. So that's kind of a bummer, but that's just how it is. Like, you got to follow on Twitter. For new stuff, I find an excuse to experiment with a new library, just to try it out. For me, that's the Lodash documentation site. It doesn't really matter what it's programmed in behind the scenes. I'll experiment with React or try to switch out React with Preact or try all this other stuff. And it's just an excuse to test it out. I learned service workers that way and caching and all that stuff. So if you have just like documentation or any kind of pet project, you can use that to try a new piece of tech and kick the tires on it. There's no way you can consume everything. And so I've just kind of fallen into things like I needed to learn how to parse JavaScript. So then I learned about AST, and then I learned about parsers, and then I learned that they're not so great. And then I learned how to optimize them. And then you learn, you get into runtime. So you start to kind of snowball into like a specialized area. And then you never know kind of where that goes. And so that's how I do it. I don't set out to try to like learn one thing. I need to learn this, so then I learn that, and then that leads to something else, which then leads to something else, which you keep doing it that way. So, yeah.
Go ahead. Do you mind?
No, go ahead.
So there were two questions. One, how you keep learning, and I think as developers we are good learners. I think, and any of us can just go and learn. Probably you need some interest. If I don't have the passion or I don't like the topic, it will take maybe double the time. So one of the things that I use is how excited I am about the topic. If I'm excited about the topic, then I can do anything almost. Then when you're picking topics, you need to be a little bit, you need to use kind of a budget of time, how much time you have to invest in one topic. Because, we cannot be like all the time in a cave, like studying like in a cave without any social life. So we need to balance this, your time. And this can change from different people. What I had to do is leave my job. That was a requirement because I wanted to spend more time doing learning. But for some people, it's not possible. Maybe you need to use the weekends. Maybe you need to use, the nights. You want to play with some new tech during the nights. But then you get tired, and then you lose the balance. So it's not so easy. You need to kind of plan what is the topic, how much time you want to spend. A good technique that I use is I put myself in trouble. And this is usually, you will say, for example, oh, I'm going to do a talk about this topic. And I have no clue about the topic, but I have a deadline. So you do it the opposite way. You say, oh, first I need the deadline, then you need to pick a topic, and once you are in a hot spot, then you kind of perform. I mean, in my case, I overperform, just doing something that I was thinking, no, don't do this, Sharon, don't do it. Then I do it, and then I go like 200% CPU. I get scared, I panic, and then I'm thinking, oh, I need to learn this. So I put, my mind into it, and then sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't work. So you need to be careful not to burn out. But then on the speaking, I think the first thing you need to try, you need to start, do something, go to a meetup, pick a topic, write a blog post. Start moving on that direction with the small steps. Depending how good you are in your path.
I have another piece of advice regarding how do you learn new stuff. And one thing that worked for me in the last few years is stepping out of my comfort zone. And I'll give you a very specific example. Last year I read a book about Elixir. I'm no way an Elixir developer. I think I wrote a very simple hello world that didn't even compile the first time. But the thing is that Elixir is very, very functional. So when I got through the entire book, I started to think in a more functional way, and that changed my way of writing JavaScript as well. So now I try to use more functional patterns than I was doing before. So I think there was a very good value in doing that kind of exercise. Now I'm doing something similar with Rust. I'm very, very far away from understanding how Rust works, but I'm starting to understand more how memory works in general, and then when I'm writing my JavaScript application, I'm thinking a bit more about memory, and I'm trying to think if the way I write JavaScript makes more sense regarding memory, or should I do something different. So I think that in general, trying to look at different things that maybe you don't necessarily want to become an expert in different topics, but just having a look, scratching the surface is going to give you a lot more details that maybe will help you on your main path that can be, for example, JavaScript. Regarding becoming a speaker, an advice that I can give everybody is just talk with your colleagues or your friends, and if you are very passionate about a topic, don't hesitate to just tell them, look, I'm doing this project, do you want to hear about it? I can show you a demo or something like that. And then maybe from that you can easily transition on doing a lightning talk, maybe in a meetup, and then you can do a full talk, and then you can start to write a blog, and then at that point it becomes very easy to just go and apply for a conference. And many conferences now have like mentorship programs, so the organizer themselves or the other speakers will help you a lot to review your slides, maybe doing that just dry run of your presentation. So don't be scared, it's just a matter of getting started, and you will see you can get a lot of support with that.
Yeah, I actually got started with writing blog posts, and when I did my first one, I was so scared that I would put it out there and everybody would tell me how wrong it is. I had a lot of people look at it beforehand just because I was really afraid, and it was fine, right? And even if it's short, even if it's something, you're writing it because you know about it. So it's probably going to be fine, right? So just do it. Lunch and learns, if you want to actually speak, are a great thing because you're in front of your colleagues, your friends, your people that you know. I gave a lunch and learn once, and then I kind of came up to do this thing. So that's why it was so bad.
Yeah, so like my best presentations were like done first inside the company to our engineers, then at a local meetup, and then maybe a conference. And also the acceptance rate, like remember, like you send 10 proposals to 10 different conferences, and maybe you'll get lucky if 1 or 2 picks you. Like, it's atrocious. They should accept me more. I don't know.
I can comment on some advices, like speak in front of your colleagues. The thing is that sometimes colleagues may not be willing to listen to you. They are busy. So ideally, if you have a girlfriend, for example, she doesn't have to know the subject at all, but she has no choice. You just sit with her at the kitchen and say, I'm going to tell you a story about functional programming or RxJS, for example. And she will be polite and she will listen to you. But the whole point is, if you can explain it to her, then you have a talent. Because any complicated thing can be explained to a person who is not from the industry. So try on someone who is available and who cannot say no. Second thing is, speaking of...
Or maybe get a partner in the industry. Doing this with your girlfriend.
No violence, no violence. Speaking of blogs, yes, I agree that if you want to speak in front of somebody, it means that you want to share. It means that you're that kind of a character who wants to learn and immediately share what you learned. Don't be afraid of speaking of something or writing about something where you are not an expert. For example, I'm never afraid, because my blog is my opinion. I may be wrong, 100% I may be wrong. Then tomorrow I will say something completely different. But today I think this way and it's my opinion and I value it. So, and then see the feedback. People typically who leave comments are angry. So are you ready to read all that? If you are, then the next step is to start speaking at a meetup or somewhere else. Speaking of how to learn, it also depends on you. There are people who learn better by visual tools. So in that case, I can highly recommend you Pluralsight. Get a subscription, and they have excellent content. Front-end Masters, Eggheg.io. So watch. If you don't want to pay, go on YouTube and Google the videos that you want. And the second thing, if you prefer reading, I can highly recommend you Safari Books Online from Morali. I don't know if many people know, but if you buy a subscription from them, and actually you can get a trial now just to see, they have books not only from Morali. They are a platform, and many publishers offer you all these books. You pay subscription and you can read all the book you want. Also, excellent video content. My videos are there, of course. And every day you can find a live webinar by one of the experts, and you can pick up the topic and you can watch it and you can ask questions and so on. So it's a great platform.
So yeah, getting back to the, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
You can continue.
Okay. No, we were talking about doing learning something when you do it. Some of my blog posts, I knew a little bit about it, and then I started writing the blog post. You have to research it. You have to then you have to write a sample piece of code, which means you have to go run it somewhere to begin with, and then copy and paste the code that works, not just coding in an editor that is just going to be on your blog post. So you have to teach yourself more than what you knew when you started. So it's a great way to learn by writing.
Simona?
Yeah. So regarding speaking and writing blog posts, it really depends. You mentioned that you really wanted to know how to get to speak to conferences. So I'm assuming that you already spoke at meetups, right? So I think that one of the key things when applying to conferences is the way you work your CFP. And having people review your abstract and kind of apply some rules to how you create your CFP that can make your proposal more successful. I think that being very clear to the conference organizers what you're going to speak about, having a clear title, a clear proposal, that's going to make your talk or your proposal more successful. Regarding blog posts, so everyone here has mentioned a lot of useful things. Another thing that I've noticed with written content, as well as GitHub repositories, for example, is that once you have something written down, it's so much easier to share it with everyone, and it's so much easier to come back to your work and actually make your life easier, because you always have those 3 things that you use most of the time written down, and if someone asks you a question, or if you want to teach someone something, you're just going to refer them to that piece of content that you've already written, and it just takes time. It gives you time to do more creative stuff. And in terms of learning, I do appreciate like all the platforms that have been mentioned. I do like video content, so I'm using Egghead.io, Pluralsight, and a lot of others. One that hasn't been mentioned is Medium.com. A lot of the framework creators are actually blogging there, so just following them on Medium will give you access to release notes, in-depth explanations of different concepts. So I think that's, and it's free mostly, so you can use that one as well. And if you need help to apply to conferences, again, you can reach out to anyone just to review some of your abstracts.
Okay, I think just one more place that you could learn from is engineering blogs. So like maybe Slack engineering blog, Twitter engineering blog. These guys like write a lot of things that you don't have to go research on your own. A good example is when Twitter added the real-time favorite feature. So like just one day I came on Twitter and discovered that just looking at it, like the likes kept on doubling. You know, you can just see it like happen real time. I'm like, oh shit, how did this happen? You know, and then I tried to check how they implemented it, and I discovered they wrote about it on their engineering blog. You know, how they scaled that feature, what infrastructure they used, the kind of tools they used, and I just understood how that feature was implemented. So if I wanted to implement that feature in a local project or probably within my team, it was very easy for me to just follow the approach. So I think there's a GitHub repository that lists all like the engineering blog alphabetically. So you can just search for it on GitHub and then just sit and just follow.
Okay, with that, I think it's time for us to call it. Thank you again. Here, let's hear it for all of our experts. And thank all of you for coming to BuzzJS. I think we had a great year, and I'm looking forward to doing it again next year. Thanks, guys.
And thank you to all volunteers at the back.
Oh, yes. Yeah.